Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Women in Leadership Spotlight Series. We are so excited today because we're going to spotlight someone very special, Jane Garvey, who you'll see on your screen now. And we want to just invite everybody to, as they think of questions they want to ask Jane during our discussion, please go ahead and feel free to enter them into the chat room. We'll be happy to field them as towards the end of our time together. But I didn't want to hesitate a minute longer before introducing Jane to you all. She has, as Kathy Igu has said, she has one of the deepest resumes I've ever seen. So, but I want to just highlight some of her legacies. So first of all, let me introduce you to Jane Garvey. And it's our pleasure to introduce you to Jane, who is the 14th administrator of the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, also known as the FAA. And now she's the global chairman of Meridian Infrastructure. So she is on the tip of the spear in terms of infrastructure in this country. And we know that that's a very hot topic right now. So listen to a few of her legacies to date. She began as a teacher, and so from teaching at her college alma mater, she became associate commissioner and then the first female commissioner of the Massachusetts Department of Public Works, appointed by then Governor Dukakis to oversee the nation's costliest highway project, otherwise known as the Big Dig, that took a major Boston highway underground. Where there was once this big, busy highway, now there are over 24 parks and multiple public plazas. Then she became the first female director of Boston's Logan International Airport, then deputy administrator and acting administrator of the U.S. Highway Administration, where she and her team innovated state financing options for highways called, get this, Garvey bonds, which I think is great. That's an acronym for something different, but Jane Garvey was very, very instrumental, she and her team, in developing bonds that made it easier for states to use federal funds for highway projects. She was then appointed by President Clinton in 1997 as the 14th, and as we've already said, the first female administrator of the FAA. She was also the first administrator to be appointed to a 5-year term, serving also under President Bush's administration, so both a Democratic administration and a Republican administration of first. She was the FAA administrator during 9/11, the terrorist attacks, of course, with the hijacking of U.S. airliners for suicide attacks against New York City and Washington, D.C. She oversaw the first ever emergency grounding of all civilian aircraft flying over the country. We were just talking about that, and having been in the airline industry at that same time, it was an amazing situation to see all of the airplanes on the ground for a protracted time, a period of time, in fact. Jane and her team negotiated also a new FAA contract with air traffic controllers that significantly changed the relationship between labor and management of the FAA, reversing the bitterly hostile relationship that developed under the Reagan administration. And that was when the FAA air traffic controllers went on strike and then were fired. And by the way, this says a lot to me about your management style, Jane, so it'd be interesting to talk more about that. Perhaps, though, this is her greatest legacy for those of us who travel a lot by air. Under her leadership, the Commercial Aviation Safety Team was conceived and put in place in 1998 with an initial goal to reduce commercial aviation fatality rate in the US by 80% by the year of 2007, so within 10 years. But by 2007, through several safety enhancements put in place by this team, the fatality rate of commercial air travel in this country was reduced by 83%. And her legacy continues, as today the reduction is close to 95%. Get this, if the US airline industry had the same accident rate that it had in 1998, there would be a major aircraft accident every 3 weeks. So that's why I say quite a legacy. She also led the way as the first female chairman of the board for United Continental Holdings, also known as United Airlines. And there are several other official appointments, executive roles, political advisor assignments. She has several honors and awards, and most recently, she was nominated for enshrinement into the National Aviation Hall of Fame with the likes of the Wright brothers, famous US astronauts, and other aviation pioneers. So Jane, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. It's just a pleasure to be here. It really is. And what a lovely introduction. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. Easy to do.
Well, isn't that one of those where you say, where are my kids? Why aren't they here?
That's right. That's right. Well, that's fun. Well, I just want to start with some fun quick fire questions so our listeners can get to know a little bit on your personal side. So you ready?
Sure.
Okay. Your hero.
Oh boy, lots of them. I like a lot of women. Ruth Bader Ginsburg is right up there. But I have to tell you, the most recent hero for me, and I think they change a lot, you get different heroes, is my daughter. My daughter, Kelly, started a preschool about 10 years ago. And during this last year with the pandemic, she was able to keep that school open. She had all of her classrooms outside, if you could imagine, in Boston. It was an easy winter, thank heavens. But she has done a remarkable job and has such optimism. And I watch her balance so many parts of her life. I think of many women who did that this past year. And so for me, my current hero is my own daughter. So,
and for good reason, How about your favorite author?
Walter Isaacson. Walter Isaacson, I love his biographies, but I love Nordic mysteries. And the darker, the better. The colder, the better. I love those. That's like my great escape.
That's an interesting insight. Okay, this is not a trick question. Prefer to travel by airplane, train, or car?
Yeah, you know what? I have to say, I do love to take a wonderful air trip. I do. But these days, wandering about in our car has been fun too. We've gotten to see the Maine countryside and so forth, and I've enjoyed that as well.
Okay, word or phrase that gets under your skin?
Oh, I think phrases that start as cool but end up being so hackneyed. I think of the word "whatever" said with great, pessimism or just a sense of not caring. I think that's probably can really irritate me.
I get that. Next travel destination?
It's going to be close to home, I think. We're spending much of the summer up in Maine, and I expect to be here most of the time. I do have a trip to Spain scheduled in October, and I'm looking forward to that.
Hope that happens.
I do too.
Favorite stress reliever?
Walking or riding a bike, without a doubt. Well, there's nothing like a good glass of wine, though, on a Friday night.
Call me, I'll join you next time.
Exactly.
And last but not least, what's your superpower?
I hope it is my ability to bring people together. That sort of becomes, whenever I look at a problem or a challenge, that becomes kind of what I start thinking about first. Where's some common ground here? How can we tackle this?
Yeah, and I have a feeling that's going to be a common theme as we talk about your journey. Well, thank you for that. That was fun. And speaking of journey, your professional journey all the way to becoming the 14th administrator of the FAA actually began as a teacher.
Yes.
You were a history teacher, an English teacher, and then, of course, several public roles in between, public service roles, I should say. What prepared you, Jane? What would you say prepared you the most to take on this highest level of aviation safety responsibility?
Well, I think it's interesting. And I look back at my career and I think everything was, it's like a building block. I think starting with teaching, which was, of course, what was possible and probable for women of my generation. That was what women did. And I love teaching. And in some ways it may have been the most difficult job I've ever had. But when I look back at that and I think about some of the qualities that you had to develop as a teacher, the ability to communicate, the ability to set an agenda, to set goals, to bring people to a point of, in this case, students, so that they do want to learn, they do want to participate. I think a lot of those elements are true in almost every position, that I've had. So in a way, while the challenges became more complicated, perhaps, or more complex, as I moved from teaching to heading the highway department to heading Logan Airport, the fundamentals there of communication and setting agenda and making it clear what expectations are, those carried through each one of those building blocks, if you will. So I think in many ways, teaching prepared me for what was to come. I sure didn't know it at the time, though.
Yeah. And what comes up for me from your description is that there had to have been a lot of intellectual curiosity, and that, from learning, being a part of the learning process for so many people, and then for yourself, how much of a learning curve there had to be for each one of these new roles.
Yes.
That if you didn't have that basis of intellectual curiosity, I don't know how else you could have done that.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because many of these positions I went into were not positions that, as you pointed out, had been held by women. And often they were very technical people had held them before.
Yeah.
So, it was that, I hope, desire to learn. I once heard someone say, women can do it all, but they have to be a little bit better. You have to really work hard. You have to really kind of keep at it. And I guess in many ways, something I learned probably from my mother.
Yeah. You were the first, I believe you were the first non-pilot in the position of FAA administrator. Is that right? Speaking of not being a technical.
It was hard to know which was more controversial, the non-pilot or the woman. So it created a lot of questions, for sure. Yeah.
Well, what would you say is your proudest achievement, and that brought you the most joy as you look back?
Boy, I feel so fortunate to have been part of so many wonderful initiatives. But one point I would say, when I think of successes I've had, I have to think that I have to acknowledge that it's always been a collaborative effort. There's not one effort that I can speak about with great pride that was done by me alone. It was always the team. Certainly, I mean, you made reference to the planes on 9/11. That was, I think, one of our proudest moments as an industry, to watch pilots, flight attendants, the air traffic controllers perform the way they did. I think my first highway project, the beginning of the Central Artery, Third Harbor Tunnel, the Big Dig, which changed one part of a neighborhood. I headed that effort, and the fact that we were able to bring people together in the community over that project, and in fact use them to actually design the project, that was incredibly satisfying as well.
Yeah, and so there's that theme of bringing people together. That's what sounds like to me, that that superpower was in place pretty quickly. If you had to bring people together to accomplish all that you accomplished. At TurkNet, we talk a lot about character, leadership character, especially. What would you say were one or more significant character shaping moments in your life? Significant people, significant events that helped you to shape your character.
Significant people were definitely my mother, who was also a school teacher, but a really strong personality in the most positive way, and always encouraged me to try something new. And Sister Joan Ellen in the 7th grade, my 7th grade English teacher, I have to say, she was a Franciscan nun,
Mhm.
and the nuns were the first really independent people
Mhm.
I knew. So I have to acknowledge Sister Joan Ellen and my mother, certainly. I think for a lot of women, their mother played a key role in their shaping and development. And I would say one of the character developments for me was, again, I was a product of the 60s. And I remember very much wanting to go and participate in the freedom marches and going down south in Louisiana to teach for a summer as part of a program that actually was being run by the Franciscan nuns. And remember, my father thought it was just terrible, but my mother encouraged me to go. And I think being part of that summer at at a very young age, or young age of 19 or 20, was pretty amazing for me. And I think back to those summer days in Louisiana with the people I met, and it was pretty amazing.
So you were actually involved with the freedom marches.
Well, yes, but believe me, I was way in the back. I was in the front with John Lewis, but no. But I think like so many people of my generation, that was sort of a big thing, and I wanted to be part of it in a small way.
So what about that experience then shaped who you are? What kind of impact did it have on you as an individual or as a leader?
I think certainly the exposure to people who are very different from me, both in their thinking and certainly minority groups that I had not perhaps interacted as much with before, and getting a sense of how people think very differently. Even some of the folks that I met who had very different political positions and so forth. But also, I think some of the divisions that existed, and we see them again today, I think a lot of that came into my thinking about, is there a way to make some of these things better? I think all of us hope to make an impact, right? And we all hope to make a contribution. And that was certainly part of it for me. So,
yeah. Wow.
Interesting times.
That's amazing. So I also know that you had quite an interesting experience having to report to 2 different presidential administrations. That had to be interesting. So speaking of interesting character shaping moments, I'm curious, how did you adapt your style, or did you, or feel like you had to 2 different presidents as the FAA administrator?
Yeah, you're right. They were 2 very, very different presidents, different leadership styles, different approaches, but both, by the way, incredibly fine, wonderful public servants. I have a lot of respect for both of them. President Clinton was somebody who really drilled into the details, wanted to know the details of any kind of briefing. So you had to be incredibly well prepared when you went and briefed the president. But he was interested. He was very, very curious about aviation policy, for example, and legislation, or where things stood. And President Bush was more interested in the big picture, and what was the impact going to be, or how do we get this done? Both of them, though, I think were it was an honor really to serve 2 very different presidents. President Bush used to call me the Democrat from Kennebunkport. So, and his family actually lives, here in Kennebunkport as well.
That's true. That's true.
And I tell everyone when they always say, "Well, how close are you to the Bush compound?" I say about 2 miles and $10 million away. So, but they were both wonderful. They were both, and it was an honor to be asked by President Bush to continue and to stay.
Mhm.
And in hindsight, knowing how soon 9/11 was after that,
Yes.
it was perhaps good to have had somebody who had been there. And
Right.
so,
Right. Right. So I have to ask, where were you when you got the call or got the information that we had been attacked?
yeah. Well, I was actually with Secretary Mineta. We
Ah,
were in the secretary's office, which is about a block or so away from the FAA headquarters. And we were meeting with the head of the European Union because we were about to have a conference in late September, September 21st, I think, on environmental issues. And this was a UN conference that was going to take place. And we were very far apart with Europe. It was unusual for us, the United States and Europe, to be so far apart on environmental issues, some of which had to do with aviation, by the way.
mm,
And so we were meeting with the head of the EU to sort of talk through about, again, how could we find some common ground and some ways to shape the UN discussion. And we were all sitting in the secretary's conference room on that severe clear, as pilots say, a severe clear day for
mm,
travel
mm.
when the first plane hit. And I still remember Secretary Mineta's chief of staff, John Flaherty, coming in and saying, "Mr. Secretary, Madam Administrator, there's been a terrible incident at the World Trade Center." We rushed to see it. And, like everyone, our first reaction was it must have been a plane.
Mhm.
Someone had a heart attack, a
Mm.
general aviation plane.
Right.
Very soon, my beeper in those days, it was the beeper that went
That's
off
right. Yeah.
and called me back to the FAA, and it unfolded from there. I have to say that UN conference that we were preparing for turned very quickly from an environmental conference to a security conference,
Mhm.
where all the leaders of the aviation and agencies throughout the world came together. And I remember giving a speech on behalf of the United States, and the response from the rest of the world was, still gives me chills. They all stood in unison and
Mm,
clapped for the United States. It was very
mhm.
moving, very moving.
Mm. It's moving even now. I will
Yes, even
admit.
now, 20 years this year.
20 years.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Wow.
I don't know if you ever saw the Broadway play Come From Away, but if you
No.
ever have a chance to see it, it's just wonderful. But it talks, I didn't know how they were going to do it. It was a musical, and it's about how all the planes landed in Gander, and
Oh,
how
yes. Yes.
they Canadians all took them in. And I dreaded going to it because I said it's going to bring back so many sad memories,
Mhm.
and I loved it. It was the most uplifting and I was glad to see it got nominated for and some awards, Academy Awards or
And I
whatever
think
it
it
is.
was written by a flight attendant. I think,
Yes,
yes.
yeah, yeah. So there
And
you go. We're
yes,
multi-talented, us women.
we are. We can do it. We
We
can
can
do it
do it.
all. Yeah, and in fact, I think she even wrote some of the music, and she was
Oh,
a very, very gifted woman.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh, I've often wanted to see that. So thank you for
It was,
reminding me. I definitely would like to see
yeah,
that.
yeah.
And having been in the industry at that time, as you know, we had reached out to every single one of our crews all over the world, and had been in touch with them within 24 hours. So we were in contact and stayed in communication with every single one of our crews. So some
Oh,
of those
wonderful.
stories came out very quickly, similar
Yes.
stories to the Gander story. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
just wonderful. I remember the weekend before, though, going to a class reunion. I won't mention which one, but I went to a class reunion, and I remember saying to my best friend, Well, I've got 4 years. I'll probably do another 2 or another 1, but boy, we got through Y2K. We got,
Yes.
capacity challenges. We, got through a whole series of things. I said, this should be, this should be a good year. And this was on a Saturday, and then Tuesday was the
Hmm. Hmm.
It's amazing how things change.
Well, thank you from all of us for all that you did to help us to get through what a horrible, horrible, terrifying time. And so you mentioned Y2K, and I know that you were with the FAA. Were you not with the FAA, seeing them through the turn of the
Oh,
century?
I was the administrator at the time. It was actually fairly soon in my career, and I remember we had to go before Hal Rogers, Congressman Rogers, every week. I would go, the IG would go, and I can't remember what other agency had to be there. We would all get graded every week by the congressman, and the FAA, he was convinced we couldn't do it. He just was absolutely convinced. So every week, no matter what we said, he would say, "You get a D." The FAA gets a D. And I remember calling home one night, and my kids were saying, "Mom, you got a D." They were horrified. Actually, I think my son was pleased because he got a few D's in his life too. But to have that work, and again, it was the agency focused on a mission, focused on an agenda, and it was all about execution and implementation. And they were convinced they could do it. They were convinced they could do it. So, as I tell folks, I remind folks that I flew across country on in the year 2000.
Did you
And,
over the change?
yes,
Yes, from
yeah, and Tom Brokaw, followed the whole path. We had about 7 or 8 other people and a whole bunch of press on the plane, but that was it. The Boston Globe interviewed my husband the week before and said, "Will you be accompanying the administrator across country?" He said, "Heck no, but I'll drive her to the airport." Spoken like a true spouse, right?
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, so changing gears, you're now on the tip, as I mentioned earlier, a tip of another spear, rebuilding our crumbling infrastructure in our country as a part of leading several major projects in your role at Meridian Infrastructure. Can you tell us a little bit about what you're working on?
Yeah, it's a really a wonderful opportunity. I feel like it's brought together a lot of things I've done in the past, and it's probably as close to some of the public work I've done without being in the public sphere, I guess. Um, Meridian builds large infrastructure projects, and we are a fund that is made up primarily of pension funds. So a lot of our funds are people who have worked in the public sector and built some of these projects. We have a number of institutions, banks, and so forth that are also part of it. So we're rebuilding LaGuardia Airport Terminal B right now, which is extraordinary. And we've had to build it, of course, while keeping an airport operating. And as you know, in LaGuardia, it's very tight and very small area to work in. So it's been extraordinary. We've really built over the existing airport. And we have 1 more year of construction. We started about 5 years ago, 1 more year of construction. And then we'll be in full operation. But if you get a chance, I mean, my favorite New York Times headline in the last year was one in the inside section that said, "If you want to see a beautiful museum, visit LaGuardia Airport this week," because we brought all this wonderful artwork into it. So
Okay, good. I thought I thought that was
yeah.
a negative
Oh
comment.
yeah, right.
No,
Right.
good.
Yeah, it would have been a few years ago, and we're rebuilding or building a new transit project in Maryland, and a courthouse in California, and a tunnel in Miami. But again, all projects that have direct impact on communities, all projects that are directly related to, I like to think, to the quality of life for people. So
Mhm.
lots of human dimensions to this work that we do in infrastructure.
Wonderful. Well, what are some of the biggest leadership challenges that you face in moving a major infrastructure project forward?
Well, I think they're the same challenges that you often have in sort of any of the positions that we're all in. I think the first challenge is making sure you have the right team.
Mhm.
And if you don't have the right team, how do you fill those gaps? How do you supplement the good team that you have? And that's, by the way, another important point. I think I think there is sometimes a tendency, particularly when you want to change a culture or change an industry, to come into a new position and to say, we got to just get rid of everything. You've got to just throw everything out. I always remind folks or young people that I'm talking with about their careers and so forth, build on what's there. There's often a tremendous amount of institutional history and good work that's gone on ahead of you. You know, you're joining sometimes a wonderful long legacy, and rebuild or build on that, recognize that foundation. Remember when I went to the Public Works Department, I remember an older engineer telling me that he loved every Saturday because he would take his children by projects that he had been involved in, and he'd say,
Mhm.
I built the Braga Bridge, you know. And I think you have to recognize that everyone, I think, wakes up and says, how can I, no one says, how am I going to screw up today?
Right,
Well,
right.
most people want to do a good job. So I think build on what you have, recognize that there may be gaps in the team, and you've got to supplement those gaps. And
Mhm.
the other is establishing an agenda and a mission that's clear, that
Mm.
can be communicated to your team, and along with that, a very clear sense of execution.
Mm.
Sometimes find that it's easy for people to say, here are the problems, here's what's wrong, but that important question, and how do we get to where we want to be, is the
Mm.
part that's often missed. So it's execution and implementation that I try to spend most of my time on.
Yeah, I would imagine you'd have to have a very aspirational type of outlook or attitude as a leader of something major.
Yeah.
And so as not to think in avoidant terms. In other words, what can we avoid about this culture that's bad?
Right,
So
right.
what can we aspire to as an organization? What is it
Yes,
that we're going to build and create together, leveraging what's already here? Is that what I'm
exactly.
hearing?
What is our mission, and how can we implement? How can we realize that? You know,
Right. How do you go about inspiring around a vision? What kinds of things do you do as a leader to inspire people?
I think, boy, that's a good question. I think one of the most basics and one of the most important is to find some common ground with them. When I went to when I started my career in the Department of Public Works, first of all, this was an average age of about, 58, maybe 60, and older. Many of them had served in the military. They were very used to structure and so forth. Um, but they were frustrated too. They had not ever gotten much support from the state legislature. They had not been able to go out and hire
Mm.
additional people. And so, but I saw great advantages in in achieving those goals for the agency. We needed the resources, we needed the people.
Mm.
So I spent the first 6 months really working with them. What do we need? What's going to make our mission more achievable? And then I worked very hard with the state legislature over the first 6 to 8 months to get them the resources that they needed. So
Mm.
I think finding that link with those who are there that you want to try to accomplish, and helping them implement that, helping them achieve
Mm.
that. I think the same was true with the FAA. The whole question of resources to modernize the air traffic control system was something that had been lacking. And so, bringing the team together, bringing the controllers in to figure out what kind of technology we needed, they wanted. We had designed some technology in the past that they couldn't use, so that wasn't so good. So helping them or working with them and deciding what did we need, and then going together to Congress to say, here are the resources, and here's why we need it. Here's how it will be used. So it's finding that area with your group when you first arrive that's important to you, but really important to them. Sometimes we go in and think only of what's important to me. I am not a hockey fan, but I always remember Wayne Gretzky's great quote. Hearing an interview with him, they said the announcer said, "How come you're such a good hockey player? How are you always successful?" And without a beat, he said, "Because I skate to where the puck is." I always tell my team that. Go to where the people are, go to where they are, whether it's the community you're working with or the employees you're working with, go to where they are first and then build from there.
And so at TurkNet, we talk a lot about the leadership character and as a balance between respect for people, building relationships of trust, and a focus on getting the results, a focus on results. So when you build CAST, the safety enhancement team that you built to be able to improve our safety record and decrease fatalities and so on, how did you bring that group of people together and which you do so well, obviously, but at the same time, focus on the results you needed? How did you do that?
Well, I would say with a lot of help from good people in the industry, one of whom you know very well. So, well, yeah, but with a lot of folks who are really committed to the same thing. First of all, it was almost a crisis situation. We had come off of some terrible accidents, Value Jet, TWA. There had been some horrific accidents, and there's something about an aviation accident. You can tell people that it's the safest way to travel and all of that, but there's something so dramatic and about such a sense of loss of control for people in the plane that I think just can terrify folks.
Yeah.
So there was a lot of focus on safety, as well there should be. But the challenging piece was that we had taken a lot of the easy situations or easy challenges, and we had solved those. So from a safety point of view, and we really needed to sort of think differently. And everyone on the CAST team, by the way, I think what's amazing is I think there is probably very few industries that are where there's more competition among the members than there is in aviation. Airlines are very competitive. They're very protective of what they do, and everyone's trying to get ahead. So you had to, first of all, say, do we have a common problem here? And they sure did. We sure did. And it was the safety record. So being able to come together around what we all saw as a common problem, I think was the first piece. Again, the common problem, we all share that. Now let's figure out how we tackle it. And it was the folks in the industry, people like Mike and others, who said, we've got to stop looking just at accidents and learning from that. Yes, we need to learn from that, but we also need to start looking at what are the trends. What are the, what's coming our way that we may not fully see yet, but where there hasn't been an accident, thank God, but how do we get ahead of it? So it became, it was almost like a culture shift of how you viewed the problem. Let's look at trends, let's look at precursors, as opposed to the history of the accident. That was an amazing shift. So that probably was key in the beginning. One of our biggest challenges was convincing the Department of Justice because they were used to punishing people. You know, we said we want to find trends. We want to have pilots tell us, for example, when something is unsafe. We don't want to punish them for it. You know, we don't want to say, gee, they did something terrible because they didn't approach the place. If it's a problem, let's try to get ahead of it. And Justice always had the view of, you know, you've got to be careful because you could have some real
Mm,
serious, you don't want to let people get away with anything. You know, we have,
that's right,
yeah,
right. So liability, liability, liability,
right. So
keep that alive. Yeah.
fixing that was a big deal.
Yeah, yeah. And I would think so. Here's what's coming up for me as you're talking about all of your amazing accomplishments and bringing people together. Um, it seems to me that not having a technical background must have been very useful in that it promoted the curiosity, the learning, and also the listening to others, and incorporating all of their ideas, and in order to make something very different than what had been done in the past, as you mentioned. So what are your thoughts about that? Do you think that that was an actual advantage for
Oh,
you
I
as a leader?
absolutely do. Yeah, I absolutely do, because it wasn't, you know, I had no hesitation in saying, look, you guys know, I'm not as familiar with this area. Help me understand it.
Mhm.
And I think a job like the FAA, and I'm beginning to think it's true of almost every job, everyone is good at certain things, but we're not all good at everything. So, you know, saying, look, let's bring in some real technical experts around climate change, for example,
Mhm.
and we can all learn from them. And that's the key always. You supplement your team with what you don't have. You know, you sometimes see leaders and they seem to surround themselves with their clones, and you say, maybe that's not the best way to do it.
Yes,
So
yes,
bringing,
yes.
bringing in lots of different perspectives, but also realizing that after you synthesize, after you bring it together, you got to make a decision.
Mhm.
Um,
That's
yeah.
that's interesting. And so, oh, I could go in so many directions here, but I'm thinking, going back to your experience in the freedom marches and meeting people that were different than you, and learning about their different thought processes and how they think differently. Go fast forward then to your position with the FAA and other positions where you were not you weren't the technical leader, but you were certainly the leader of people in bringing together diversity of ideas and thoughts. How much of that do you think was an influence for you or how important was it for you to bring together that diversity of
Oh,
thinking?
it was the only way to succeed. It would,
Mhm,
in my view. I mean, you want people who share values with you. You know, you want people who share uh, and the notion of, for example, collaboration. I always like to be sure to remind folks that's what we do. You know, that's what we have to do. Um, but bringing in people who were strong in different ways was, for me, absolutely critical. My deputy, by the way, when I came to the FAA, there was another deputy that had been chosen, and it just didn't seem to work. I mean, again, that was a political position. And I remember
mhm,
talking to the secretary and then ultimately to the president about, look, I think what we need is someone with more of a technical background, someone who uh, the agency knows and can respond to. And we ended up with a long time employee who became, by the way, one of my closest advisors and closest friends. And, he had been there forever. And he has
mhm,
worked his way up all the way through the FAA, and then he became the deputy administrator. We were, I thought, a great team
mhm,
because he did provide that kind of technical background
mhm,
and did provide that sort of almost like also a voice for people who were, they felt more comfortable perhaps talking with him.
mhm,
But he also embraced the agenda. That's
mhm,
what I loved about Monty. He was willing to sort of think differently. And I
mhm,
remember once asking him, what do you think the most important quality is when you're recruiting people. And I thought for sure he was going to say some technical expertise. And he said the ability to communicate. If you can't communicate what you're trying to achieve, and if you can't communicate the engineering excellence or the engineering knowledge that you have. So he
Yes,
said, I put a high premium on that. I always thought that was interesting.
that's interesting. And I have to ask you, did you ever feel as being one of few, if not the only woman in many of your roles, did you ever feel patronized? And if so, how did you deal with that?
I did. And I think all of us have felt that way. And very often, by the way, I don't think it's with any intent
Mm,
of being paid. They'd be
yes,
surprised to be hearing it, right? Because
right.
they think they're being polite. I try to handle it with humor and also perhaps with a little firmness, a little bit of a, well, that's not exactly, or, so and each one is probably different depending on whether I think the intent is, uh,
Mm,
you know,
yeah,
what the intent might be.
right.
I do think though that I had it easier than with many of my female colleagues who were not in positions like mine. The fact that the position held
Mm,
a high degree of, sort of perceived power and so forth, I
mhm,
think made it a little bit harder. There may be a lot of patronizing behind the scenes, but it was a little harder to do
mhm,
directly to me. But yeah, I think we've all experienced that.
mhm. And I also think that you have really earned a lot of respect from a lot of people that would also help. So certainly there is positional power, but the respect that you've earned, and I wonder if some of the respect you've earned along the way has to do with, yes, you are very capable at what you do, but you also have a balance of humility and graciousness. I just
And
making you very approachable. So I wonder if that's part of it as well.
I hope so. Thank you.
Yeah, yeah. So your first high profile government role was with the Massachusetts Department of Public Works. You were commissioner there. And you described that, speaking of being patronized, but you described that as being quintessentially a male agency. I love the way you described that somewhere along the lines
Yeah.
in some sort of media interview. I'm just curious, can you share a bit of your experience about being the first or the only female? What
Yeah,
other experiences
that
can you share?
yeah, that may have been the most dramatic position or in terms of visibility and so few women. I used to joke that there was never a line in the ladies' room, at a DPW meeting. And again, the average age was close to 60. Military, pretty crusty individuals used to doing things a certain way. Um, so yeah, it was an extraordinary experience. I found actually I loved going out and visiting the crews that were out working on the front line. They were much more honest with you. What are you doing here? There was a little bit of what's a nice girl like you doing it. Yeah. So you got the unvarnished version from them. But again, I think, and you've said it a little bit earlier, that I think when you find a way to succeed with them on points that they want, then that's in the end what matters to folks. Are you working with me? And I hope I proved in the beginning that I could very much work with them. But I do remember getting into a car once and going up to see the governor, and I remember the driver said to me, "So who are you a secretary for?"
Mm.
So I was surprised to find out I was the secretary. So, but yeah.
That's funny. Yeah, yeah, we've often had guests who who've been mistaken, women leaders,
Yes, yeah,
executives who are highly accomplished, who've been mistaken for being the secretary or being the admin and so on and so forth in meetings. So that's
right. By
interesting.
the way, often a position that has much more power
Yes,
in very practical ways, right?
yes, yes, yes.
Very
Well,
important.
how has your experience as being the first or only female in an organization, how's that shaped your perspective on women in the workplace in terms of equity and inclusion?
Yeah, it really does. And every woman I've talked with that I have a lot of respect for, people who are friends, we talk about this a lot, that it does put a real responsibility, I think, on you to make an effort, an extra effort to recruit women, to be sure that they're being considered. And I was able to do that. I've been able to do that really pretty much along the way. I also have to acknowledge, though, that I also worked in administrations where there was a strong commitment to that. Even, way back in the Dukakis administration in the 80s, that was a big issue for Governor Dukakis. It was for Governor Bush. It was for Governor Clinton, for President Clinton, President Bush. So I've been fortunate to have that kind of support in a way. I
Mhm.
think one of the most rewarding pieces of my career is to look back and see young women that I've hired and see where they've ended up. I was thinking the other day about a young woman I hired right out of graduate school, was a planner, and she became, about maybe 10 years later, 12 years later, the commissioner of the Department of Public Works.
Mm,
Sadly, only the second one, but she became commissioner. Another young woman who went on again, and she come into government, now is a senior vice president of a very, very large engineering company, and is really running the North American branch. So I've seen a number of these young women go on to very successful careers as well, which is wonderful to see. Wonderful to see.
yes, yes. That for those of us in our stage of life, that is in fact one of the best legacies of all.
Yes, yeah.
Thank
I do, though, I'm always struck by the fact that they're struggling with the same issues that we struggle with.
you. Mhm.
They're trying to find balance in life. They're trying to figure out, how do you have a career and a family? How do you, can you do it all? It's a lot of the same questions
Mhm.
that,
Mhm.
or even the same issues around being taken seriously. And I
Mhm.
hate to say this, but I was at a senior meeting once, which will remain nameless, but we were doing a session, and it was sort of a management session, and the leader of the session took a suggestion from a woman, who were just two of us women, and took a suggestion from the other woman who was present, and it didn't make any comments, said fine, moved on. And then a few minutes later, a man raised his hand and said the same thing. And he said, that is a wonderful idea. We all laughed about it afterward, but I thought, it's, it's the 21st century. Why is this still happening?
Oh my gosh.
But the good news is the man said, when the fellow said it was a good idea, he said it was a good idea when so-and-so said it too, so.
To his credit, good, good,
Right,
good,
yeah.
good.
So maybe we're
Or
making
being
progress.
talked over.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. There's many experiences like that. Well, as our history teacher today, I'm curious, what lessons would you like to share with us about leading organizations through especially large transformational change?
What lessons? I think we've actually talked about a lot of them. I do think establishing exactly what it is that you want to accomplish, putting in the right team is very important, and then focusing, laser focused on implementation,
Hmm.
not just the what is the problem, but how are we going to tackle that problem? I mean, I often found that you had to break it into pieces. Even if you think in terms of the lofty goal of safety that we had. That was the long-term, or that was the longer term goal. That was a larger goal. But then what are the steps over the next year, over the next 6 months that are going to take us there? So I think sometimes breaking a problem down into more, usable or more manageable, rather, goals is important as well. And always expect the unexpected. You've got to be flexible in these positions. That
Yes.
certainly is true in government, but I think it's true everywhere. You have to expect the unexpected.
And being, as the popular word today is, be willing to pivot when necessary. Yeah, been a lot of pivoting lately.
A lot of pivoting.
Well, I've got one last question and then we'll turn it over to Q&A, but I want to remind everybody that we'll also come back to Jane for the final word of the morning. But my last question before we go into our audience's questions is this: what do you want to pursue that you haven't already?
You know, when I left the FAA, someone asked me that. They said, what are you going to do next? And I said, less. That hasn't worked out so well. That last hasn't worked out so well. So I'm not sure I want to pursue anything necessarily, professionally. I'm at Meridian for a while longer, but I think to continue the curiosity, to continue to learn, to find things that I don't know about, and to still work on that whole question of balance. For me, that has always been a challenge, finding the way to have enough balance in your life so that and I think that's something I want to continue to work on probably all my life.
So what pulls you out of balance, do you think?
That sense of responsibility that I really, I've got these deadlines. Someone's asked me to do something, I've got to do it. I think that's, again, probably something that came from my early childhood. And I think still wanting to, I feel like a lot of women, you still want to be the perfect homemaker. You want to be able to do all those things at home, and something has to give. So sometimes, so it's always, I think, a challenge. But some of my male friends, they have the same challenge.
Yeah.
Always the sense that you've got more to do. You've got more to do.
Yeah. And it's, is retirement ever in your vocabulary, do you think?
I don't think I'll ever probably fully retire, but I hope to get to that less stage of, where it's maybe
whatever that is.
Yeah.
We have a colleague here at TurkNet. Her name is Susan Hitchcock. She's actually the mother of women in leadership that we're involved with now. But she's moved on to 100% flexibility.
I like that. That's a good, I'm going to give that a lot of thought. That's great.
All right. Yeah. 100% flexibility. I love that. And yet she's staying completely busy. And in fact,
that's it.
She is in our audience today, and I know she's got a lot of questions she's already entered. So Kathy, why don't we ask our audience to give us their questions if you're there. There you are.
Absolutely. We've gotten some great questions too. I just want to say something to you, Miss Garvey. I can't call you Jane. I just have so much respect, Miss Garvey.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
But you are the perfect epitome of something that's very important to the TurkNet Leadership Group leadership character model, and that's humility. The way that you talked about your admins and the power of admins, your personal support team, I have to say, is one of the most extraordinary groups we've worked with. So kudos to them. They are excellent. But the fact that you would even mention your admins, I mean, that just, and all during this, you have talked about other people and the collaboration, and it's just such a strong quality. So personally, I just wanted to say how much I respect that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So first question up, what are your personal core values? And I know you've talked about that some in this discussion, but could you just give us a few that you think are just totally the most important?
I think respect for others is something that really ranks first, second, third, and fourth probably in my list. That basic respect for others, and that all of us come to this, through our experiences with different past experiences, and so for me, that's probably the most fundamental of my values.
Thank you for that. That's great. I love this question. How did mentoring play a role in your life? Did you have a mix between female and male mentors? I know you mentioned the nun and you mentioned your mom, but professionally, what mentors did you have?
My mentors professionally were nearly all men for obvious reasons, right? There weren't too many women, if any, at the time, and I learned a lot from them. From one mentor in particular, who was the Secretary of Transportation when I was the Commissioner of Public Works. I learned something fundamental to infrastructure and to my career, which has been that there's a great intersect between what we do in infrastructure, what we do in transportation, what we do in aviation, and the quality of people's lives. That it's really not about the excellence of the engineering, but it's the impact that all the work that we do have on communities. That really makes all the difference. He's the one who taught me that. He designed the entire Central Artery project through downtown Boston without taking a single home. And I always had such respect for that. He would work around it and work, to be sure that he protected those neighborhoods. So I've always, I think he was probably the most influential. But then also people like the governors of the presidents I served, who were so willing to be supportive of women in these positions. So lots of different mentors, and always Sister Joan Ellen. Always Sister Joan Ellen. You know what I remember with Sister Joan Ellen? Every Sunday, the bishop would bring the nuns together, and he would say, "Are you ready to meet the Lord?" And every week, Sister Joan Ellen would say, "Not this week, thank you very much." So I'm kind of with her. More to do, more to do.
I love that. Okay, getting back. What advice would you give to young women who are starting out their careers today? We have a lot of recent graduates on with us today.
You know what? I've seen this a little bit in working with a lot of young people and I do that still. What I often find is they're so interested in figuring out what the next step is. They don't focus on what they're doing now. They're very, and I mean this in a positive way. They're ambitious in a very positive way. But, my advice to them is always, do the best job that you can where you are. Don't worry about the next job right now. Do the best job where you are, and speak up when you can. And, if something comes your way and you want to raise your hand to volunteer, do it. But focus on doing the best job that you possibly can. I don't think I ever knew what my next step was going to be. And maybe that's unusual. And I'm not saying you shouldn't plan, but, I think it will come if you focus on doing a terrific job where you are. So that's my advice for starting out anyway.
Okay. This is not a question, but we are getting comments about your kitchen. People love your color scheme.
Thank you. Come and see it. We're in Kennebunkport, Maine, and it's lovely. And actually, I should do a whole tour. That would be fun.
Absolutely, would be up for it. So these are more industry-related questions. In what ways do you see aviation moving forward with a sustainability mindset?
Yeah, that's a terrific question. And I think that's one of those more interesting changes that I've been watching over the last decade or so. Probably 10 years ago, I don't think you heard a whole lot about sustainability. When I was FAA administrator, we heard a lot from communities about concern about noise, concern about air pollution and so forth. But But we're hearing now, even from investors, I thought it was interesting when I was on United's board that investors were beginning to say, what are you guys doing on sustainability? What are you doing on climate change? So investors are interested in sustainability. And definitely, I mean, I see a place like United, and I know it's true for Delta and the other airlines as well. You listen to the CEO of United. It is his goal to address the whole issue of sustainability and climate change. So I think there's a real role there for the industry. And I think what's wonderful about the industry is it's made up of so many creative and smart people that they're going to get it. They're going to tackle it, and over a period of time, the whole interest in biodegradable fuel, moving away from the classic fuel sources. I think all of that is a positive sign, and we're certainly seeing more and more of it. So kudos to the industry, and because it certainly is a challenge and it's so important.
So this is a follow-up question with another question saying, do you see the industry moving to a net zero stance? Do you think that will happen?
Yeah, that's a longer term goal. I think it's moving to that, and I'm certainly seeing it on the surface side as well. Tremendous emphasis on the electric vehicles and so forth. So I think, again, longer term goal, steps to get there. That's the important thing. What are the steps to get there, and how do you implement something like that? Very ambitious.
And then the next question, again, about the industry was, in the future of aviation, do you see us moving closer to gender parity?
Oh, I hope so. I hope so. And I do think there have been some good steps in that direction. Looking at the policies, I haven't been part of the board at United for about since 2019, but certainly reading about the policies that are coming out, I think we're seeing much more emphasis on equality and so forth. So good steps.
All right, this next question is about confidence. Have you ever had to rebuild your confidence at any stage of your career or after a particular experience?
Every day. I think, anytime I go to give a speech, I start, you've got to build the confidence. Every position I've taken, new position, I've never said, wow, this is going to be, a slam dunk. I'm ready for this one. There's always been a certain amount of having to, sort of build up your confidence and
how do you do that? Is it research, talking to people?
Well, if my administrator, if my assistant, a close friend is on, she will know that I do a lot of talking to her and with her and asking her advice. She's a wonderful source. So I do talk to people, but also I think it's just internal. You got to focus internally. You've got to remind yourself, and you have to remind yourself that almost everyone feels the same way. Isn't it true that you talk to the most accomplished, people, and they will tell you they get butterflies every time they go to give a speech or take on a new initiative. So yeah,
I think that's a great answer.
It's a bit of work, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So can you expand more on, we talked a little bit about curiosity and intellectual curiosity. Could you expand a little bit more on that?
Well, I wish the person who asked that question would tell me how they do, what they think of that too. But I guess I would say that maybe it's partly because I have not been an expert in every one of the fields, as Anne pointed. I think Anne made a couple of really good points on this, that I'm not an expert in some of these fields, so there's a natural desire to want to learn. You don't want to go into it blind. I don't expect to become a physics professor overnight, but I want to know enough to be able to understand the discussion. So I think there is that because you're not an expert, sometimes it just creates even more curiosity. But again, going back to my mom, I think that was the way. She was always learning. She was always reading, and I think I picked up a lot from that. I still love to read. I love to devour those articles in the newspaper and so forth every day. So, and travel's a great way to sort of encourage your curiosity too. And I've done a lot of that over the last several decades.
I noticed our friend Susan Hitchcock, again, she mentioned, totally believe not being the technical leader can be a distinct advantage. Reminds me of the advantages of a liberal arts education as a leader.
Absolutely.
Oh.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that is a very valid point. And so oftentimes universities and colleges have been so focused on STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and less focused on the liberal arts side of education, when in fact it's proving to be a very good education and background for critical thinking, and of course, innovation and creativity and so on. So anyway, just thought I'd throw that in. I thought that was a
fantastic and important point, because it is that critical thinking. No matter what the issue is, no matter what the problem is, those are the skills you need to bring to it, right?
Yes.
So,
and I'm surprised, Susan, you didn't ask this question, so I'm going to ask it instead. Have you ever thought about running for political office?
I did. I have thought about that. And, this is probably one of those times where you make a choice. And I remember agonizing over it and just feeling terribly disappointed when I finally said no, but turned out to be fine. But my children were very young, and it was a position in Congress. And I even had been recruited by a group of people, and I was very impressed with that. I was very excited about that. But my children were young, and for me, it just wasn't the right time. But I've no regrets. I mean, it was wonderful. I feel like I've had a chance to serve in, public service without having to do fundraising.
Well, you have a fan. Somebody says, I'd vote for you, Jane. Oh,
well, thanks.
I think you'd have a number of voters added to your list today. So we have time for probably just the two last questions I see. So go ahead, Kathy, and then we'll move into what our updates are from TurkNet. Do you see those questions? And I'll just go ahead. I think Kathy's screen is frozen. What do you hope for the future of the FAA and aviation?
I hope they continue their focus on safety, which to me is, for the FAA, is paramount to its mission. And I am always heartened to see administrators or senior leaders in the FAA continue to talk about the importance of safety. So I think that's probably the most fundamental. But I also think for the industry writ large, I am constantly impressed with how they're able to respond to crises, whether it's the crisis of the last year with the pandemic, or certainly the 9/11 crisis. So that ability to be able to respond well to the crises, I think is very impressive. But I hope we continue to see more of an emphasis on the environment, and more of an emphasis on the role that aviation can play in being part of addressing the larger climate issues that are so, I think, front and center these days.
Yes.
I would say that that's probably my hope for the future.
Yes. This industry can lead our country in a number of different ways, and you've done a beautiful job of outlining how. So Jamie Helander, who, by the way, is soon to jump into earning my master's in aviation sustainability. says you are an inspiration.
Oh,
And so she's asked, are you looking to take on any mentees? I wish you could be my mentor.
well, I am always willing to have phone conversations or Zoom calls. I'm up for that. But there you go.
Well, thank you, Jane. We're going to come back to you for one last word here in just a moment. And Kathy, good to see you back. You were frozen at just the right moment. Your smile is beautiful, at least.
Yeah,
so
Lucked out.
So would you go ahead and give us an update on what to expect from TurkNet in the coming days and weeks?
Yes. Sharing my screen now. Can everybody see?
Yes.
Okay, good. So first, this is, since we've been talking with a barrier buster, for sure, it's a perfect segue into our Women of Character podcast. Episode 2 is out now. This episode has Virginia Means, the Chief People Officer of United Distributors. She is just amazing. She re-entered the workforce after she left it for 10 years. And as you know, more than 3 million women have left the workforce during COVID. So please tune in. You can go to our website to get the link, and then we'll be sending you something after this, after we have finished and gotten the recording of this episode here that has the links to all of these things we're going to talk about. But Anne hosts this, and it is fabulous. She's just a really good host. Anne, I just have to give you kudos.
Thank you.
The next meeting, we're so excited. We have Carolyn Stefanko, and I hope I'm saying that correctly. But she's going to be speaking about an expert's perspective on women's progress, challenges, and opportunities. So I want everybody to absolutely to tune into this, July 23rd, again at 8 o'clock, and you'll be getting some more information about this. This is a complimentary webinar that TLG is hosting on July 8th. Vicki Abelson is just an amazing speaker. And it's really talking about resilience in an industry that's overrun with burnout. You don't have to be in healthcare to attend this, but because we're all experiencing so many things hitting us at the same time. But this is talking about resilience, and it's going to have a lot of great tips. So it would be wonderful. We would love for you to join us, and we'll send you that link as well. And then surprise, Susan. Susan is the founder and the former host of Women in Leadership. And we just want to she is definitely taking time of 100% flexibility, but she is so busy. And we have 2 blogs that she's written that are on our website. She is working very hard on her She Rose podcast. She's working on a big project about grandmothers. She is not slowed down one bit. So Ms. Garvey, once if you're never going to retire, she's a great model for this 100% flexibility. It is certainly busy. So we do encourage you to go out to the website, go to the Women in Leadership section, and click on her blogs. And then we just want to talk about getting social. So please join us on LinkedIn. We have these fabulous videos that Tino Mantella, our president CEO, does every Thursday. We tweet, we are on Facebook, we have YouTube videos, and we certainly would love for you to subscribe to our newsletter so you can hear from us monthly. And then if you need to contact us, we'll be sending you this information also. Okay, that's it for my spiel.
Wow, that sounds so exciting, I have to say. Wow.
Well, we're going to put you in the newsletter. Definitely.
Yeah, we do have a lot going on at the TurkNet Leadership Group. And but anyway, so it comes to this, and that is, Jane, what is the one thing that you want to leave with our listeners today?
Well, I think the one point I would make is that take a chance. There will be opportunities that come your way. You may not feel you're quite up to it, or you may have some reservations, but if it's of interest to you and it's something that deep down you'd like to try it. Take a risk. I have never been disappointed. As I said before, every time I've started something new, I've not been sure. You know, you're never 100% sure, but there are wonderful experiences out there, and enjoy it. Have fun. That's been really important to me with all of the positions, even in the worst of times. But finding some joy in all of the work that we do, I think is really important. So.
Oh, thank you, Jane. You've been a source of real joy for us today. So thank you for taking a risk and coming on with us today. We so much appreciate it. And thank you to all of our listeners for hanging in there with us this early Friday morning, and have a wonderful weekend. Thank you, Jane.
Thanks so much. It was wonderful. Enjoyed it.
Take care.
See you. Bye-bye.